Hello and welcome back to our celebration of 10 years of How to Be Awesome at Your Job. For our 6th year, I'm going to highlight an episode that was really transformational for me. It's by Michael Sorensen, episode 693, Building Better Relationships Through Validation. And boy, his book, I Hear You, was just utterly phenomenal. I read it and I listened to it. And I was talking to Michael. I was like, hey, man, like this stuff is so good. Do you offer coaching? Do you have coaches that do coaching? Can I do some like reps, some practice of this validation stuff? It's so transformational. And I want to do more practice better. And he's like, I've thought about that, but really things are going well with my job. So I'm going to focus on that. And sure enough, now he has been promoted to CEO of a company that has brands of products that I actually have in my home. So great job, Michael. He is awesome at his job in validation and in other ways. So I hope that you will give this one a close listen, put into practice these goodies, and watch your relationships become enhanced, almost like magic.
Welcome to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, the show where brilliant professionals share how to sharpen the universal skills required to flourish at work. Enjoy more career fun, wins, meaning, and money with your host, Pete Makaitis.
Michael shares a superpower to enhance your relationships that has really changed the way I think about conversations. And I think it will do the same for you. So you'll learn 1, how to improve conversations with the 4-step validation method. 2, how we unintentionally invalidate others. And 3, how to move past the discomfort of emotional conversations. So if you want to check out the show notes or the transcript or the links to items that we mentioned here, it's over at awesomeatyourjob.com/EP693. And if you're at awesomeatyourjob.com, I recommend you check out some of our cool stuff, such as the Gold Nugget email summaries, which give you a 2-minute write-up of Michael's wisdom in an email that comes right to your inbox when each new guest episode releases, as well as unlocking the whole vault of all 693 of these such summaries. We call those the Gold Nuggets at awesomeatyourjob.com. So that's the story of the Gold Nuggets. And the story with Michael Sorensen is that he's a marketing executive by day and a best-selling author, speaker, and relationship coach by night. I so loved his book, I Hear You, and I've been thinking about the principles he shares about validation, just about every day or at least every week in terms of how I have my own conversations. He has shared this with many impressive clients, including the United States Navy. Now, here's Michael. Michael, thanks for joining us here on the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm excited to get your wisdom on validation and the good stuff from your book, I Hear You, the surprisingly simple skill behind extraordinary relationships. But first, I need to hear, you made your own mattress. What is the story?
Yes. I wonder when that would come up. It's something I'm a little bit embarrassed and a little bit proud of. I've got a bad back, and I set out a few years ago to find the perfect mattress to try to make that back pain go away. And that was when Casper and some of these other direct-to-consumer companies were coming online, and they've got free return policies. So I thought, why not? How can it hurt to order? So I ordered that. It killed my back. I ordered the next one. That still hurt. And I actually ordered 7 mattresses and then returned them or donated them before I actually sourced my own foam and cut it up and found a cover for it and all of that, just to try to find a mattress that would work best for my body. And the irony is I ended up finding one that actually works, and I tossed my homemade one. But, it's still fun to build things.
Well, now I got to know, what was the difference? What did your homemade version and your final version have? The others did not.
This is incredibly nerdy. I would take a picture of myself laying down with my shirt off so I could see my spine alignment.
Okay.
And all of them had my hips sagging lower than my shoulders, because I had, my shoulders were propping me up, but my hips were down, and so it was creating this curve. And so I actually got different density in the foam for each section. And so my shoulders had a lighter foam and my hips had a heavier foam to try to get that optimal spine alignment.
Well, I'm impressed with just the sheer force and persistence that you rocked in arriving at this. And likewise, you've got something that you call a superpower, validation. Tell us, what do you mean by validation? What's it do for us, and why is it a superpower?
Yes, absolutely. I find, especially in the workplace, since this is largely a podcast about the workplace, we place a lot of focus on the value of listening, right? Being a good listener. And we talk about how important that is. I think we all kind of nod our heads and we say, yeah, I could do better at listening. But really, the main premise of my book and the main thing that we're going to talk about here today is that the truly good listeners of the world actually do more than just listen. They listen, seek to understand, and then validate.
Mm-hmm.
And that validation, that's kind of the secret sauce. That's what, like you mentioned, that I call a superpower, because so many people are craving that. And validation is essentially just telling someone, hey, I understand how you're feeling, and you're not crazy for feeling that way. That's really the essence of it. And it sounds so simple. It is simple, but I'm telling you, it makes all the difference in the world, because most of us just jump in with feedback or advice, or we try to help people. We try to make them feel better when they're coming to us with a complaint or a concern or a question, when really what they're wanting is simply to feel heard and understood, right? You're venting, you're complaining, and you just want someone to say, man, that's tough. Or, then what happened? And ask a few questions and kind of get into it with you. That's validation. And it makes all the difference in the workplace, in your relationships at home, with your friends and family, because it helps us feel better connected to each other.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, so then can you share an illustration of just how powerful this is?
Absolutely. I talk early on in the book about research conducted by Dr. John Gottman. For your listeners who might not be aware of him or familiar with him, he's a world-renowned marriage and family therapist. And a number of years ago, he and his colleagues set out to determine what makes the healthy, happy couples of the world, stay in a happy, long relationship compared to those who separate or divorce. And I love the study they put together. They decorated their lab, I think it was the University of Washington, to look like a bed and breakfast. And they invited 130 newlywed couples in, and they said, spend the weekend here, just do what you normally do on a weekend, cook, eat dinner, watch some TV, read the news, whatever it is, while we observe you, which I think is kind of creepy, but, it's funny what people will do for money and science. And as the observers watched, they noticed that throughout the day, these couples would make small, seemingly insignificant requests for connection. They'd be sitting there at the table and the wife would look out the window and say, oh, honey, check out that car. And what they noticed is that the way the spouse could respond in that instance made all the difference in the connection that they had in their relationship. So in that particular instance, the wife notices the car and her husband could look out and respond in one of three ways. He could say, wow, that's awesome. I love that color, positively, right? And then that's validating, right? Matching her emotion, getting excited with her, stepping into it is validating. The second way he could respond is negatively, of course, saying, oh, I hate that. That's the worst car in the world. Or the third way is simply passive, just go, nah, that's nice, dear. Maybe not even looking up from his smartphone.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems simple, but when they went back, they gathered all the data, they started analyzing it, and then they waited 6 years and they followed up with these couples and they said, how are you doing? Are you still together? And if you are together, are you happily married still, or have you separated? And what they found was the couples who had separated validated each other only 33% of the time. Whenever they would make a comment like that, their spouse would either be passive or even negative about it, but they wouldn't engage. They wouldn't connect with them. Whereas the couples that were happily married 6 years later validated each other 87% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like nearly 9 times out of 10, those healthy, happy couples were meeting those bids or those requests for connection. And I thought that was interesting. At that time in my life, I was in a relationship that wasn't going so well. And I realized, oh my gosh, it's because this woman isn't validating me. She's not connecting with me in this way. And I flipped the page on this article. And apparently Dr. Gottman and his colleagues can predict with up to 97% accuracy whether people will be together and happy or separated years down the line, simply by observing these types of interactions.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love that study because it made a big difference for me personally in my romantic relationships, but I can tell you it's every bit as powerful in the workplace, because work is relationships, business is relationships, right? Whether you're a manager, whether you have colleagues, whether you have clients or customers calling in, you're working with people, you're talking with people, and we want to feel connected and understood. And so validation is one of the most powerful ways to build that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, there you have it. So then you've got a particular 4-step method for doing the validation. Can you walk us through this?
Absolutely. And I'll preface this by saying validation is simple. And so sometimes people look at 4 steps and they're like, well, what's this? This seems complicated. Why do I have to do this? I reverse engineered this 4-step method to try to help people apply it in some of the more difficult situations. Maybe we can talk later, Pete, about how to validate someone when they're angry with you or when you disagree with them, because I find that's where a lot of people get tripped up, but it actually makes all the difference in the world if you can first hold your defense for a moment, listen to them, validate them, and then get in to your side of the story. And so the 4 steps are: first, listen empathically. Like, really listen for the emotion that the person is sharing, not just the words they're saying. And then once you've identified how they're feeling, the second step is to validate, right? Just identifying their emotion and offering some justification. So again, if they're upset, saying, oh, of course you're upset. You were up all night working on that and they just threw your work out the window. Yeah, that's validating. Then step 3 is where you give feedback or advice. So again, if you disagree with someone or if you have a suggestion, you can give advice, but it comes after the validation, because it allows that person to feel heard and understood first. And then the 4th and final step is to just validate again. It creates a nice little validation sandwich, following up the conversation, whether it was a difficult conversation, and you wrap it up and you just say, hey, thanks again for coming in and talk to me. I know these conversations are uncomfortable, and yet we got to have them. And I really appreciate your candor. Or if it's positive, your friend's telling you about something awesome that happened at work the other day, and you're all excited. At the very end, you just say, hey, congrats again. You worked your butt off on that presentation. I'm happy to hear it went well. It's that final step there to kind of tie it all together. So again, those 4 steps: listen empathically, validate the emotion, offer feedback or advice, and then validate again. And you can go through all those in 30 seconds, or you might do it several times in a 2-hour conversation. But it gives you kind of a loose framework and a basic idea of, oh yeah, hold back on the advice, listen, validate, and then get into it.
Okay, cool. Well, so one of my favorite parts in your book were the demonstrations from like heavy relationship situations and then a toddler exchange.
Right.
And so it was nice to show the breadth of it. But let's take a look. Let's say we're in the workplace and someone, well, hey, maybe I'll just take one of the roles and you take one of the others if that works for you.
Great. Yeah. A little role play. Here we go. Hey, Pete, how's it going?
Oh, it's fine.
Fine? Just fine?
Well, I was working on this process to get things automated and to be way more efficient whenever we're handling the widgets. And well, it just all went to heck. I mean, absolutely nothing works the way they say it's supposed to work. People have told me they're going to get me things and just straight up haven't gotten me the things. The software keeps crashing my computer. It's basically a total failure.
Oh, geez. Man, I'm sorry. How long were you working on that?
Yeah, it's been about 4 months.
4 months of work to have it just fall apart here at the last minute.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. That's so frustrating.
Yeah.
I mean, what are you going to do? Like, do you think you can salvage it, or is it going to you have to throw it all out?
I guess I'm just going to keep calling these people and until they finally give me the right answer. And hopefully that works eventually.
Oh man, I'm sorry. I hate it when you spend that much time and money on something and then it just falls apart. It's you would hope that with a product that expensive, people have it figured out, right?
Yeah, totally.
Oh, man. Well, let me know if I can help in any way. Honestly, I don't know if I can offer much help, but I mean, I'm happy to if there's any way I can.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you. All right. Well, so I saw the steps in action. Anything you would comment upon in that exchange?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, where it's kind of role play, we're both kind of, stumbling through it. But one of the most important things that I encourage people to do is ask a lot of discovery questions early on. If you already know what's going on in the person's life and the situation, you don't have to ask a lot of questions. But if you don't, that's really important to make sure you're validating the right things and that you're actually understanding. I've worked with some people who they try to validate right away and they're like, you must be so angry. And they're like, well, no, I'm not angry. I'm actually embarrassed, and you kind of go through it. But so I asked a couple questions, not a ton, but then pretty quickly I was matching your emotion. I was trying to kind of reflect what I was seeing in you, which is, yeah, of course you're upset. If you spent 4 months on that and I actually said as much, right? Of course you're upset because, and I showed that justification and saying, yeah, it makes sense. That's maddening to go through all of that. And that little piece is so powerful because oftentimes we as humans are taught to kind of bury our emotions.
Yeah.
We're taught to not be upset. And sometimes we tell people as much. Like, oh, don't worry about it. I'm sure it'll work out. but that doesn't usually feel very good, right? You're like, well, I am upset. Like I'm looking for you to see that. And so that was that validation piece of me just saying, hey, that's really frustrating, especially if this and that, or you would think if they had all this time and money put into it that they would have it figured out. Those are all validating statements because they are giving you permission to feel the frustration that you're feeling.
Mm-hmm. Now, as you say it, it sounds so simple, and yet it feels a little rare. I don't know if you've got stats on this, but it seems like we're all hungry for this and we're not having our fill, broadly speaking. Is that fair to say?
100%. And I wish I had stats, Pete, but the stats that I can give you are just looking at the reviews of my book and the emails that I get, the hundreds of thousands of people that are saying, oh my goodness, this is what I've been missing. And it's all over the board, right? You see people saying, I didn't realize it. This is what my spouse was asking for. Then you see people saying, if my partner had done this, we would still be together. Then I get emails from customer service managers saying, can you do a training on this? Because I listened to your book and I started implementing it and customers are 1,000% happier, whatever it is. But you're right. It's so simple, but we are craving it. And that's one of the things that makes it a superpower is we're all craving it. Few of us recognize that that's what we're craving, but we do recognize that we're not getting it. And that's where a lot of relationships kind of hit this rocky point because, you'll go and you'll talk to, your boss and your boss, maybe you'll express a concern or something. And if he or she just says, don't worry about it, I've got it.
There you go.
You're like, okay, well, what do you say to your boss? Versus if your boss says, well, help me understand what's going on, and they ask a few questions and they get into it. And if you're upset and they say, first off, thank you, I can imagine how frustrating this is given all blah, 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 right? And you sit there and you go, yes, they get me. It makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah. Well, so let's hear about wrong things to say. And I love in your book, you did this nicely. I remember a couple was struggling with infertility. And then someone said, oh boy, yeah, I just look at my wife and she gets pregnant. And I've heard people say that before.
Yeah.
And of course, when you're reading it in the context of the book, you're like, wow, that is absolutely a horrific thing to say to a person in that context. And yet people say it because I don't think they're tuned in on this wavelength yet. So don't worry about I got it is another example of we're not going to get into your feelings. This is already handled. So what are some other choice things you hear people say a lot that are kind of the opposite of validating?
The invalidating statements. Yeah. I mean, it's things like, oh, you'll be fine. It could be worse. Or at least it's not fill in the blank. As you listen or thinking or you're hearing these things, ask yourself, have you ever said this to someone? Because you're right, Pete. I mean, people say it all the time. Or we say, oh, don't worry. Things will just work out. I've got a couple siblings who are still single and they desperately want to find their person. And I can't tell you how many times when they come to someone and I'm kind of a fly on the wall and they're like, how's dating going? I'm like, not super well. And then almost immediately the response is, oh, I'm sure you'll find me eventually. You're a great catch. Or I wouldn't worry too much about it. It's going to work out.
Yeah.
And you can see the look on their face. They're like, I know that. I'm not stupid. But I'm not enjoying life right now. It's kind of hard. Like I was looking for a little of that validation. Everybody means well. It's not like we're trying to be rude to people, but we think that's helping when in reality, it's hurting.
Yeah. And I think, not that we have to go too deep into this, but one reason we don't do it is we're not aware. Two is we think we're helping. I think the third might be that for a segment of folks is like, we're just kind of uncomfortable getting into all that emotional stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, hey, if that's you, what do you do about that?
Well, to that, I would say, and obviously everyone's different. The situations are different. I still hit moments when I'm like, I don't really want to talk about it, like with people. So you obviously have to kind of judge the situation. But this is where I think validation becomes, again, such a valuable tool because one of the key reasons I believe people are uncomfortable in those situations is they don't know how to help, right? Especially if it's a heavier. I remember talking to a friend whose parents passed away recently and unexpectedly. And prior to knowing how to validate, I would have been like, what do you say? Right? Like really, what do you say? Because I haven't dealt with that. I'm not about to think that I can give this amazing advice. But validation is so powerful because you don't have to say much of anything. You don't have to fix it. The fix, they're going to figure out. And so validation just gives them that space. And so when you talk with someone, I like, Pete, your example, how you said, okay, well, ask me how I'm doing. And you just say, fine, because that happens a lot. And usually it's when people kind of want to talk about something, but they're not quite sure you want to. So they'll just kind of say, I'm fine. And you can read their body language, and then you get to decide whether you want to follow it deeper. But if you do, you can just ask questions. You can see how they're doing. And you just ask questions and then you validate, and you ask questions and you validate. And you don't ever have to get into solutions. With my friend, I just said, oh my gosh, like I can't even imagine. And I just sat there for a moment, and I let her sit for a second. And she said, yeah, it's brutal. And I said, so, how did you find out? And she explained it to me. And I just, again, and even just that response, is validating. Didn't even have to use words there. Again, it's just showing respect. It's like, man, I see how you're feeling. And we were able to kind of go through the conversation. I didn't give one bit of advice. Heaven knows she didn't want advice. She just wanted someone to kind of sit in it with her and feel it. And so if you're a little uncomfortable with these emotional situations, I do encourage you to try. Next time you have an opportunity, try it and try to just validate the person. Ask some questions, respond with the emotion that you can tell they're feeling. And to tie it off, you can just say, again, like we did on the example, hey, I'm here for you. If you ever want to just talk, let me know. And they'll usually say thanks, and then you move on.
Yeah, that's good. And how do you feel about the I'm sorry, I'm so sorry? Because sometimes people hate that. And other times it seems completely appropriate.
Like in which context?
If like it's tragedy or like let's say a divorce, a death, an illness, you say, oh, I'm so sorry. And they're like, I'm so tired of everyone saying that. I don't know. Where do you come out on this one?
Well, yeah, again, it's very situation dependent. So in that situation, if they actually responded like that to me, I'd be like, oh, hey, like, I'm sorry, how can I help? Right. It's difficult because you kind of have to roll with the punches a little bit. I was talking with someone just the other day about this. And while, yes, I put validation into a nice, clean 4-step framework, the reality is it's more of an art form than it is just a tight framework. It's not something you can just like pull out a sheet and go, okay, Michael says to say this, and then you're going to feel better, and then we're going to ride off into the sunset. It doesn't work like that. It's a skill, it's a tool, which means we have to figure out how to kind of use it in the right situations. And so you're right. Certain people, they're going to respond to those I'm so sorry or whatever, and they're going to get defensive, especially if they're hurt, or they're going to come back at you. And you can still use validation again, So let's just say that you had said that to me, Pete. I would, again, I'd say, oh, I'm sorry, and if they say, yeah, just everybody just says they're sorry and I don't want to hear that, I want to move on, then I might say, yeah, I don't blame you. This is a heavy situation. And then they might say, yeah, and we can keep going on. But you see how I was even able to validate their frustration at me and just say, wow, okay, yeah, you know what? The more I think about it, I see how that was hard. I'm sorry for that, or whatever the right response would be.
That's good. Well, I guess now I'm curious. So you said at the very beginning, validation basically conveys, hey, I hear you, I understand what you're feeling, and you're not crazy. I'm curious, like when folks are crazy, maybe either literally that we've got sort of a diagnosable situation, or they are blending their emotions with like the exact wrong answer. Like, my boss is such a jerk, I'm going to march in there right now, slap him across the face and tell him in no uncertain, whatever, I don't know. Right. Or it's like, I'm so worthless, the world would be better off without me, like intense.
Yeah.
I'm sure the right answer is not, you're right. Not the right move there. So in those trickier places where folks are saying something oh so wrong, how do you think about validation?
I'm so happy you bring this up. And I'm going to preface this by saying that the FBI uses validation in their hostage negotiations. It's a critical part. And if you think of high stakes situations, you got people in a building threatening to kill them and themselves. And so that's very much what you're saying, Pete. Like, you don't want to just say, yeah, do it. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, your life's not worth living, right? You don't want to go there.
Yeah.
But that's not quite what validation is. And that's where the 4-step method comes into play here. Again, first step is listening empathically. So if let's keep it with the coworker example, and they're really upset with their boss and they're about to march right in there and yell at them. Well, let's just say for a moment, we think that's a bad idea. So if we just say, you can't do that, you're going to get fired. How are they going to respond?
Go ahead and fire me. I'm sick of this. This is horrible.
Yeah, exactly. I don't care. Exactly, right? They're just going to push back, and you can push back and they'll push back and you're not going to get anywhere. And so you have to first listen to them. Well, what happened? And they vent and they complain. And again, you can validate there. So you don't have to validate. You don't have to say, yes, go in and yell at them. But if he says, well, he called me out in front of everybody in that meeting, then you could say, seriously? Yeah. And I'm so angry because I worked my butt off all week. Well, yeah, like I'd be upset too, right? That's the validation piece. It's not, yeah, you should go in and yell at your boss. It's, well, of course you're upset given what just happened. And so you keep going through that conversation. You listen, you validate, you listen, you validate. When you can tell they've calmed down just a little bit, or maybe they're about to be march right in the door, then that's when step 3 comes into play. And you say, well, hold on one second. I do have a few thoughts on this. Do you mind if I share?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now that intro, that transition to step 3 is big because it shows respect. If you just say, hold on, don't do it, it's a bad idea, again, they might get defensive and start arguing with you. But if you first ask permission to share your thoughts, most people will say, fine, what? What is it? What are your thoughts? And then you can say, maybe yelling at your boss isn't the best idea. Have you thought about this or have you thought about that? And what you'll find is if you've listened and validated first, they are 100 times more likely to listen to your advice when you bring it up.
Mm-hmm.
So it all comes down to that order. And again, you see the same thing in situations where someone's angry at you. You see the same thing in the hostage negotiations. They don't say, sure, kill yourself, sure, ignite the bomb. They say, what's going on? Where you coming? Where is this coming from? And they talk through, they listen, they validate, and they say, well, can we just talk? Can we just talk face to face? The power of validation is to bring the emotion back down so that you can have a human to human conversation.
Yeah. But, I remember you talk about FBI hostage negotiation, and we had Chris Voss on the podcast, who wrote an awesome book, Never Split the Difference, and did FBI hostage negotiation. And I believe there's a story there in which they just kind of said the same thing and over again, kind of like, hey, it seems like you're scared that, you're not going to be able to make it out of there. And you're worried about what's going to happen to you and your family, like something along those lines, just like repeatedly.
Yeah.
And then hours later, she just kind of walks out.
Right.
And so it's wild how potent that is.
And that's why I joke in the book, it's like a superpower. Early on when I started using this, in my day job, I'm a manager of about 30 people. And, I was a very young manager at the time when I wrote the book, and I didn't know how to deal with certain situations. And as I started using validation, I had some pretty tense conversations, some people yelling at me, some really difficult things. I had made some mistakes, all of that. When I started using validation first, it was shocking at how it made everything easier and helped me mend relationships and helped me earn trust and respect. I had a gal who once worked for me, left the company. A few years later, she was one of the beta readers, actually, of my book. And she actually called me up after she read it, and she said, I get it now. She said, I could never understand why I felt so comfortable talking to you. And I don't say this to pat myself on the back, right? But I say it to illustrate the power it has. She just said, I always felt so comfortable talking to you, and I couldn't figure out why, and now I get it. It's because you listened to me and you validated me. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's powerful.
That's good. I'm intrigued by when you made some mistakes. How might validation work in that context? Like, hey, I can understand it'd be really frustrating that this guy, namely you, means you have to redo a bunch of things now.
Exactly.
Or how'd that go?
Yeah, it just comes down to ownership. And that takes humility. It's not an easy thing to do. But if you did make a mistake, there's no sense in beating around the bush or making an excuse. That never looks good in work or just life, right? So I've had, in the times that's happened to me, I'm trying to think of a concrete example, and I'm drawing a blank right now. But if we just go with the hypothetical, they come back and they say, what happened? You told me you would have this yesterday. And I take a moment and I go, oh, shoot, he's right. And I just say, you're right. I'm sorry. Yeah, I dropped the ball on that. I'm going to figure it out, and they say, well, it threw off my whole presentation, blah, 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 blah. Again, there's a chance to validate. So they tell me how it affects them. And instead of saying, well, you should have followed up with me, that's not, doesn't look good. I own it again. I say, I'm really sorry. I overbooked myself. It sucks, to be expecting something. I committed to it. I didn't deliver. You're right. How can I help? It's almost like a parry, but it's honest. And there's actually, in my opinion, great respect that comes from that and strength to just say, yep, I messed up. I'm going to figure out how to make it right. And in most instances, people will come down on their anger pretty quickly when they see you're not going to fight them. You just say, yep, I'm sorry. I see how that affects you. Let's figure out how to make it work.
Yeah, that's good. Well, so then you use the phrase, hey, I have some thoughts. Do you mind if I share? Asking permission. Are there any key kind of words and phrases that you like and naturally show up a lot when you're validating, or some key words and phrases to be banished?
Yeah. So, I mean, when you get into the validating and such, right, we've talked a lot about that. But if I may, Pete, let's take it into that step 3 where you're giving feedback, because that makes a big difference. One place a lot of people trip up, and again, this is going to sound so simple, but using the word but
Okay.
can be quite dangerous, right? When you're connecting 2 sentences together. So if you try to validate someone, let's say they're angry at me, right? We'll stick with that example. And I say, you're right, I missed it, but it's really not that big of a deal. Well, that just undid everything, right? Like I was going down the path, I was validating, and then I said, but, and that now puts up a red flag in most people. And they're like, but what? Here comes your counter argument. And I say, it's not that big of a deal. Well, whoosh, that's an invalidating statement. And they're like, what do you mean it's not that big of a deal? And away we go into that cycle. I'm a big fan of changing that word from but to and.
Okay.
Now, you still shouldn't say it's not that big of a deal. But let's say in that situation, I say, you're right. I committed to do that and I didn't. I'm sorry. And I wasn't the only one responsible for it. Can we talk about X, Y, and Z, other ways, so there's that and connection point is very powerful. And I get that feedback a lot from people saying, wow, I had no idea changing that one word, because for some reason, we as humans, we really key in on that. And if someone's saying, hey, I really like, the example I use in the book is, I like what you've done with your hair, but we go, but what? There's something else versus, I like what you've done with your hair and I liked it better the other way. You still don't want to hear that, but at least it's a little easier to hold.
Yeah.
And so when you're giving feedback to your colleagues, when you're giving feedback to your friends, or heck, even your boss, try to avoid the word but and just use and in there. And that actually makes a pretty big difference.
Okay. Very good. And I'm curious if you just don't feel like you're relating in any way to their emotion, in terms of like, I am mystified as to why you were so angry or so annoyed by this thing that really seems like nothing to me. Yeah. What do you do?
This is where it gets a little tricky, because I get this question every now and then. I didn't address it in the book, but in the years since, I've really given it a lot of thought. I've paid a lot of attention to how I still validate in those situations. First off, I do encourage you to always try to find a way to empathize. Oftentimes, it's easy to just say, I don't care about people. There's a lot of value that comes from learning to empathize with people, learning to identify emotions. And that's a bit of a different topic, though. If in the moment you're like, dude, like, what's going on? Why are you so upset about this? Again, ask some questions first. Don't just dismiss it out of hand and assume they're being crazy, because most people, when you really get into the full picture, act quite rationally. But if you really feel like they're not, there is still value in, I don't want to say lip service, but in still kind of going through the motions and saying, yeah, it makes sense that you're angry. Of course you would be. Even if inside I'm like, I don't really think so. But, it does make a difference still. Again, it's not where I recommend going first. Always prefer genuine empathy. But at very least, you can have some sympathy. And you can at least see the emotion they're feeling. And you can see that they're upset because such and so yelled at them. And that alone can still be valuable and still be helpful to them.
Yeah, that's good. And I guess I'm also thinking about, have you really enter into their world, as we stay on a fishing trip, and someone was angry that another person had parked nearby our campsite and started fishing. And I actually don't care that much about the fishing on the trip. They're just great guys. I like hanging with them, and they go fishing, so I go with. And so someone was getting kind of worked up about this. And I thought, what's it matter? It's a big old river or lake. But I think, like, as I dove deeper into it in terms of what this person wants most is to catch big fish. It is rare they have the opportunity to go catch fish. And they perceive, rightly or wrongly, I don't actually know enough about fishing, that person's placement there is going to diminish that.
Yeah.
And that there are many other places he could choose from. Then I could understand, that would be irritating that guy did that when he could just go somewhere else.
Right.
But it takes some doing for me to get there. Yeah.
It does. And that's what, there are times, again, going back, talking about how it's a tool, doesn't mean you always have to use it. I am guilty almost every week of my wife and I'll get into a little argument or even just have a discussion. And if she gets upset about something, I want to jump to fix it. And I'm literally the guy that wrote the book on it, quote unquote. And I'm just like, you know what? Let's just do this, fix it, and we'll be done. And she's like, really? You're not going to validate me at all? And I'm like, crap, you're right. But there are times when you have to just kind of pick and choose. And there are times also when you might just jump in. If we stick with your example there of that guy, If he comes up and he's yelling at you because he wants your spot, you might be like, dude, really? Like it's a campsite, and he's like, well, you can then choose to validate, or you could choose to just dismiss it. If you paid for it, it's rightly yours. I mean, you can walk away, right? You don't have to engage with people who are upset or angry. But if you want to, it will work.
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, 95, 99%, I'm making up stats here, but most times it's amazing how you can calm someone down. And so if he's all upset, you say, yeah, like, I'm sorry, like we booked it. And he said, I booked it too. Well, there must have been an issue with that. That's really frustrating, right? If you came all the way down here expecting to see this, I get it. Let's go chat with, the front office at the campsite or whatever, and let's see if we can figure it out. But just that little, that if you expected all this and came down here, that's validating. And that can help tone it down just a little bit. I'll give you an example of, this was a few months ago now, but at work, a certain employee who is no longer with the company placed an order for 40,000 t-shirts that we didn't need, but he thought we needed them. He thought it was going to be awesome. Well, a few months later, I get a call from another guy on my team saying, hey, just so you know, t-shirts arrived. This other company who prepared them, they're expecting payment. I don't think we owe it to them because we didn't approve it. So don't worry, I'm handling it, but you just might hear about it. You might want to know. And I thought, well, hold on one second. Can you send me the email thread? I want to make sure that we're being honest here. If we said we're going to order them, we got to pay them. So he sends me the email thread, and I see this back and forth. And my guy was being quite invalidating, frankly. He was just very kind of traditional negotiation tactics, right? Hard line, no, not going to happen. And obviously that's not going to go well on the other end. And it was getting really heated. And so I actually took over the conversation, and I reached out to the guy and I said, hey, do you mind if we hop on a call? And his response was very curt, yeah, this time, period. So in advance of the call, I did a little bit of research, and I determined that we actually weren't on the hook for the t-shirts, but I still wanted to smooth things over, right? I still wanted to do right by them. So in advance of the call, I thought, okay, I'm going to come right into this. He's going to come in ready to fight. He's bringing his A game. I'm just going to validate him first thing. So I pick up my phone, I give him a call, he answers, and I say hello, but then before anything else, I say, hey, before we get in, I just want to apologize. Like, this has obviously gone on far longer than either of us want, and as I'm digging through, it looks messy. There's a lot of back and forth, emotions are running high. I apologize for that. I'm hopeful that we can get on this call and just talk man to man and figure something out. And literally the shock was audible in his voice. He literally stuttered on the other end. He was like, oh, okay. What do you have in mind? And we were able to chat, we talked through it, and I explained my side, he explained his side, and we reached a resolution that both parties felt good about. It didn't take long, right? But it had been going on for months, literally months, Pete, back and forth, and tensions were running high. And in about 5 minutes, I was able to undo almost all that tension and find a resolution with just a little bit of listening and validating.
That's beautiful. Well, Michael, tell me, any final key things you want to share about validation before we shift gears and hear about some of your favorite things?
I think maybe the last thing I'll say on it is I think it's important to point out that when I talk about validation, we're not validating people's worth. That's one thing that sometimes validation gets a bad rap, because people say, well, validate me, tell me I'm worthy, tell me I'm good enough. That's dangerous, right? I'm not talking about that. We're talking about validating emotions and situations that people are dealing with. And so if you have a coworker, or if you have a family member, or even a spouse who's constantly complaining, or they're always just like, I need more. I need you to tell me that I'm good enough. That's a separate conversation. That's a place for boundaries. That's a place for having a conversation and saying, hey, I care about you, or you're my buddy. And again, there's that and instead of but. And this isn't working for me, or I'm not sure how to help you because every time I give you advice, it seems to go in one ear and out the other. So I think it's an important clarification, because I never want people to think that I'm saying, well, just tell people what they want to hear. Just tell people that they're great and everything's going to work out. Again, validation being a tool, you use it with other tools, and used well, it earns you respect. It helps you set boundaries. It helps you earn trust with those around you. And that is why it's such a powerful skill.
Oh, thank you. Well, now could you share a favorite quote, something you find inspiring?
The quote that I go to most often is action cures fear.
Okay. And a favorite book?
I love The Compound Effect and The Slight Edge. They're both the same principle, two different authors, all about how small, simple things build up over time to great results. And that's been That's frankly how I got to writing the book in the first place. I committed to 15 minutes a day, at least. And sometimes it would snowball into hours and then weekends on end. But 15 minutes, small, simple things got me to where I am today.
And a favorite tool?
If we're talking tech tools, I'm a big fan of a text expander.
Oh, yeah.
You type in a shortcut or like a snippet. Like I type in C phone and it types out my full cell phone, or Pmail, it's my personal email. Little things like that just save a ton of time. That and a clipboard manager. So I can copy a lot of things and paste a lot of different things. If you listeners don't use those, you should check them out.
What's the best clipboard manager for Mac? Do you happen in your opinion?
I use CopyM, like copy apostrophe EM.
CopyM. Okay.
It's the best one I found thus far. There's probably better ones, but it works well for my needs.
Thank you. And a favorite habit?
Well, I spoke to this earlier on the compound effect, but it's just the simple little things every day. So if I have a goal in mind, I'm a big goal setter, I'll break it down to tiny little chunks that I can't not do. 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day, just to make sure I'm doing it.
And is there a particular nugget you share that seems to connect and resonate with folks? They quote it back to you a lot?
Yeah, it was that idea that when people vent or complain to us, they usually already have a solution in mind. They're not looking for advice. They're just looking to be heard and understood.
And if folks want to learn more or get in touch, how'd you point them?
My website's probably the best place to find me, michaelsorensen.com. You can contact me via contact form there and read a lot of my free content.
And do you have a final challenge or call to action for folks looking to be awesome at their jobs?
The biggest thing that I've learned is, or at least what I appreciate most, is people who really don't use the word can't. I guess it kind of comes full circle. We joke about my building my own mattress, but I'm a big believer that you can do anything. And that's so trite we say. I don't mean it in like, you can be an astronaut, though you can be. But if you want something, you can figure it out. And it just depends on if you're willing to put in the time and the effort and the money. And so people on my team or at work who say, no, I can't do that. Can't do that. I hate it because it's so small-minded. I much prefer to say, well, we probably could, but it would take the world. I'd rather say, what would it take?
Yeah.
How could we do it? Even if it's wild and out there, just what would it take? How can we get there? In my opinion, people bring that into the workplace, that can-do attitude, that I'm going to figure it out no matter what it takes. That stands out to me. And I think that is what makes people very successful in life.
Michael, this has been a treat. I wish you much luck with validating and being validated.
Thanks, Pete. Appreciate the time. Great chatting.
Big thanks to Michael for sharing his wisdom with us. And big thanks to our sponsors. Check them out. One sponsor to check out is Monarch. Summer's here, and there's nothing worse than planning a vacation only to discover you don't actually have the money for it. Bummer. I don't personally enjoy thinking about or fiddling with money, so I love resources that make this quicker and easier. Monarch is the personal finance app that tracks everything: accounts, investments, savings goals, and spending. Get your first year of Monarch Core for half off, just $50, with the promo code AWESOME. Most personal finance apps only tell you what you spend, but Monarch helps you set goals, map out big purchases, and see if you're on track before it's too late. Plus, it puts everything into these beautiful graphical summaries so I can quickly drill down into anything that seems off or weird or seems like it could be a great savings opportunity. Cancel subscription that I forgot about a while ago? Oh, yes, please. So use the code AWESOME at monarch.com to get your first year off Monarch Core, half off for just $50. That's 50% off your first year at monarch.com with the code AWESOME. One sponsor to check out is Shopify. Shopify powers millions of businesses worldwide, from household names like Mattel to small businesses just getting started. If you've been sitting on a business idea, Shopify makes it easy to make it happen. What you need to start selling is included and ready from day one. When your first customer is ready to pay, Shopify Checkout helps more of them successfully finish their purchase. And when they return, their details are already there. With just one tap, they check out super quick. Because Shopify handles these tricky setup and checkout details, you've got more free time and less frustration, so you can tackle the cool, fun, strategic stuff that really moves things forward. Shopify bridges the gap between your idea and a real business. So go make one. Ka-ching! Start your free trial at shopify.com/awesomepod. That's shopify.com/awesomepod. And spelled out, that's shopify.com/AWESOMEPOD.
This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace.
Last year, I went through many different life changes. I needed to take a pause and examine how I was feeling in the inside to better show up for the ones who need me to be my best version of myself.
When you're navigating life's changes, Talkspace can help. Talkspace is the #1 rated online therapy, bringing you professional support from licensed therapists and psychiatry providers that you can access anytime, anywhere.
Living a busy life, navigating a long-distance relationship, becoming a first-step father, Talkspace made all of those journeys possible. I could speak with my therapist in the office. I could speak with my therapist in the comfort of my home. I was never alone.
Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay, no insurance, no problem. Now get $80 off your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
I really loved what Michael had to say about the word but and how we got to really watch out for that because it could invalidate the thing that you just said before you said the but. And it's so interesting. I saw a buddy of mine shared a text message exchange that they had with their landlord, and they weren't too pleased because the landlord had put some pretty smelly and potentially toxic road sealing chemicals on the driveway. And so that was sort of getting into the home. And so she was mentioning, hey, what's up with this? I see I'm having, I feel kind of sick. And then the landlord's response was, I'm sorry that you're feeling ill, but the product is approved for residential use. And we've been doing this for years. And it just sort of struck me how, that response is, it's not mean. It's not evil. It's not completely ridiculous and out of line. And yet, boy, when you have that but right there, just invalidates, like, I don't actually care that you feel sick. That's your problem and not ours. And it's that, wow. With conversations with Michael Sorensen and others who've enhanced our communications, I just could not imagine sending a message like that today. And yet, if I had not interviewed all these guests, or in your case, listened to these episodes, I think you too might find yourself in such a position where you do communications that are fine, yet kind of suboptimal and invalidating without picking up on some of these subtle, finer points. So huge thanks to Michael for sharing that and more about validation. And again, those show notes, the transcripts, the links to items we've referenced are at awesomeatyourjob.com/EP693. Hope to catch you next time, and peace.
Thanks for listening. To get the most out of the show, we recommend 2 key things. First, check out the extra resources at awesomeatyourjob.com. You can find this episode's transcript and links, as well as the perfect episode for your situation. You can search the full text transcripts of hundreds of episodes or explore episodes tagged by topic and competency covered. Second, subscribe to the podcast and get future episodes automatically. You can subscribe by telling Siri and several other smartphones and speakers, subscribe to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, or by tapping subscribe in your podcast player of choice. If you'd like some extra help figuring out podcasts and how subscriptions work, visit awesomeatyourjob.com/subscribe for guidance. Hope to catch you on the next episode of How to Be Awesome at Your Job.
This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace.
Last year, I went through many different life changes. I needed to take a pause and examine how I was feeling in the inside to better show up for the ones who need me to be my best version of myself.
When you're navigating life's changes, Talkspace can help. Talkspace is the #1 rated online therapy, bringing you professional support from licensed therapists and psychiatry providers that you can access anytime, anywhere.
Living a busy life, navigating a long-distance relationship, becoming a first-step father, Talkspace made all of those journeys possible. I could speak with my therapist in the office. I could speak with my therapist in the comfort of my home. I was never alone.
Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay, no insurance, no problem. Now get $80 off your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.